Hey guys, I'm here to get into Martin Scorsese's After Hours, which he released in the year 1985, and it's just one of the four absolute masterpieces he made in the 80s. Which is just what time has proven the essence of Martin Scorsese. Every single decade since the 70s onwards, he has made numerous masterpieces. And so this man is literally, and it seems like at this point about the greatest living genius of all time. I'm so excited for his new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I'll be seeing here in about a week. Oh man, I'm hearing like the biggest reviews. So I mean, but this is just an underrated classic. After Hours is because like this is a very 1980s aesthetic. This is whenever I think Martin Scorsese kind of started his. I think his 70s and kind of ended after Raging Bull because he started to take on more of a comedic outlook on things, not take it too seriously. So this always ends up being reminiscent of the spirit that Taxi Driver conjures, but it's not as dark. It's still a very dark film in tone, but it's a lot more of a quirky comedy. Like I kind of feel like this is sort of like a comedy take on a lot of the Eyes Wide Shut formula, where you're just kind of on this rendezvous of a man just going on a night out in New York City, and it just kind of just going to weird, crazy, surreal, nightmarish places. Ultimately, it's like stuff that kind of would haunt him person forever because he just keeps going further and further down this rabbit hole because he just kind of runs into all the wrong people and gets friendly with all the wrong people, and it always comes back to bite him in the butt later. Basically, it's just almost taking a bit of like Wizard of Oz where we live. Like this man just wants one thing. Back to the Future for that matter too. He just wants to go home, but he's just stuck, unable to afford any because he has like no money on him basically. So he's unable to afford anything. So it's just absolutely insane the way this whole film plays out. This is a very unique project for Martin Scorsese because he was adventurous uniquely in this as I think he wanted a more youthful outlook on life as opposed to his previous films because this was actually influenced primarily by a college written story that was heavily influenced by a Kafka outlook. And this is like a very 80s kind of outlook on the Kafka-esque, manner. So I think that Martin Scorsese just really tapped into something that's in the same page as David Lynch, but it's also a very different kind of film altogether. So it's not as similar as say something like Barton Fink. This is just sort of its own language entirely of just a kind of quirky outlook, maybe closer to the Coen brothers more than anything else. Or Robert Altman, a little Robert Altman for that matter, where it's just kind of a bit of a classic old school kind of sense of humor, but there's a lot more of a dark nightmarish kind of tone lingering over all of it. And it's one of Martin Scorsese's best films, honestly. I think this like completely transcends himself and kind of gets better the more I watch and the more I think about it. I really love the distinctive nighttime, past midnight kind of atmosphere living in this film. Like it captures the appeal of it and sort of the intimidation of it all, and just kind of the mystery that just goes. But it's just really one of the most entertaining films ever made. I feel like it's just one of those films that, again, it's the feeling again. Eyes Wide Shut conjures it too. It's a very rich kind of suspense where you just feel like anything could happen at any moment. And I don't know. I really love just how different, like kind of taking note of how different decades depict New York City. Like here, it's different. It looks pretty different from the Taxi Driver ones, but still a bit hellish all the same. But a little bit more of a like I don't know. There's a little more of a relief about it all too. Maybe it's a little more everyman. Like I think Paul Hackett's just not a tormented guy in the same way that Travis Bickle is whatsoever. So that makes it a very different outlook. He's just a guy who just gets nuts. He's just a situational guy. He's like an almost if anything, very portrayed as very a very everyman guy, just getting into just awkward situations that just keep unfolding into bigger and bigger things. And I instantly felt this way the first time I saw this film. I think I was about 17 when I first saw this, and I just knew right away this is a grand masterpiece and very influential. I think definitely know a lot of films in the come will certainly be taking in a lot of influence on this because there's a lot of organic like anxiety that you can kind of feel in the big thing. That's what this film is really honing on in. I think just a lot of anxious moods. There's a very anxious quality about this film where everything feels kind of off in its own kind of way entirely. But it's very subtle all the same. Like it's a unique kind of feeling. Like it almost feels like certain moments belong like in a certain kind of horror film, but it's not really. I can't call it a horror film. It's just sort of its own genre entirely. What's also interesting to note is that Martin Scorsese made this. He was initially really wanting to make The Last Temptation of Christ, but of course, like that was his passion project. He'd been wanting to make, I think, basically since he started becoming a famous director in the early '70s. But I think that at this point, like he was sort of just wanting to take on some experimental stuff since to kind of build up to, where he could have. So we got the okay after this film. Interestingly enough, like yeah, I don't think it was that popular at the time, but it has a massive cult following now, and I feel like it continues to grow in cult status. Because I'm like, I just like I just this is what's not to like about this. I feel like everything here is great. It is an underrated film. It still is. I mean, thank God it's on Criterion. Yeah, but it's terrifically unpredictable the entire way through. It's always entertaining, it's always fascinating, and always thought-provoking, interesting. A unique level of energy lives in this film. Paranoid, but it's also very just personal in the way that Martin Scorsese does best. So, yeah, I'll say it. I recommend this film to anybody. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like I know Taxi Driver is the more popular film, but I feel like this is almost the more gateway open kind of film to that kind of structure. I feel like that one's much darker and disturbing. This isn't really out to disturb as much as it's most meant to just kind of take you through a bit of a nightmare. But so it's a lot more of like an 80s comic relief outlook, but yet still tuning in on all the same kind of themes and notes all the same. So just another one of many Martin Scorsese's masterpieces. This is definitely one of the masterpieces he made of the 80s, most definitely. He was an all-time genius in the 80s. I mean, because he was every decade. Goodness gracious. I mean, the 2020s, it sounds like he's about to dominate. I'm like, goodness gracious, what a man. So check it out, After Hours. Very underrated.